Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome back to the Truth About Ag podcast. I am your host, Evan Schout, with my co-host, Christian Hebert, and a special guest today. So before we start, remember, like, share, subscribe, comment. And while I got you here, I want to plug a little bit of Farmer Coach. Look for a new cohort starting in November, as well as Maverick Ag. Any of your financial consulting, please reach out. So today we got a bit of a special guest, and I don't know a lot about you, John, so I'm going to let my co-host do quite a bit of the talking, but I am going to try and jump in once in a while. Obviously, I met you at the farm a few weeks back. So from my standpoint, give me your background, because I don't know enough about you to even start asking questions.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing me into the conversation, guys. I'm looking forward to a good discussion. So I've been fortunate enough to be around long enough to have done a few wonderful things with the life I've been given. Spent a number of years / decades as a journalist. Was a reporter and foreign correspondent for the Globe and Mail. Spent most of the 1990s living in India, writing about Asia and Africa and the Middle East. Went on to become the business editor of the Globe and then the editor-in-chief up until 2014. And then came to RBC, where I've been coming up to 10 years, building something that we call economics and thought leadership, which is really an effort by RBC to understand the economy, understand the big issues from trade to immigration to artificial intelligence that are shaping the direction of the Canadian economy, like beyond the next quarter, like where are we heading into the 2030s? And that includes climate. So I get to spend a lot of time on understanding what climate is doing to the economy, what climate change is doing to the economy, but also trying to understand and inform as best as we can Canada's climate policies and what our many clients, from farmers to food processors to oil and gas companies to transportation companies, are doing in terms of their own climate policies. So we bundle all that into something called the RBC Climate Action Institute.
So what you're saying is we're lucky you had made some time for us today.
No, I feel like the lucky one to be on this show.
Yeah, Truth About Ag podcast, and we have a Globe and Mail, past Globe and Mail editor-in-chief and a current vice president at RBC on, and some of our listeners will wonder how does this tie to agriculture. But I think the other thing we do a lot on the podcast is I read an article, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, Evan, you could probably clarify it for me, but it's called The Conspiracy of Awesomeness. And really what it is just very curious individuals that I think are trying to make every day better. And it really hit home for me, because I realized that that's one, I'm addicted to business, but I'm addicted to curiosity and this conspiracy of awesomeness, people that are just trying to make things better. And if I go back to the first couple times we met, John, I would say that's, to be honest, why I keep reaching out. And then the more I learn about you, the more I find it kind of ties into a bunch of stuff Evan and I talk about. So I'm going to go back a few years to start, and then we'll move into more current topics. But the one interesting thing that I've learned about you is you took a business degree, but had this creative urge. So kind of jumped out of the world of your first business job into newspaper writing. And I think you did a little bit back in college itself. And it's funny, because Evan and I talk about this to say, if you have a child that wants to come back to the farm or be in agriculture, maybe don't always just look at an agriculture degree. Like, how do we round that out? And so, I think I'd just like you to talk a little bit about how your business degree has helped, fuel your creative edge and everywhere you've been. And then also you can weave in some of your India time and how that global view of Canada has really helped kind of shape your purpose.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're taking me way back in time. But I did a commerce degree, and enjoyed it, but really loved writing. I started to work on the student paper, became editor of the student paper, worked part-time at the local newspaper as a copy editor, and actually got a job in business coming out of school, but just felt like very quickly I got to go chase my passion of newspapering, and I think caused my parents' hair to gray pretty quickly, and gave up a good full-time job to scratch my way into journalism. But I only discovered through time, like over the years, how valuable that business degree was to journalism. And I've never studied journalism, rightly or wrongly, but found that the fundamentals of business, so I was able to write about business and actually started as a business reporter. So I understood business, but it was the critical thinking of business that really helped me in journalism. Things like, believe it or not, stats was incredibly helpful. Not that I ever did like regression models for a story, but the mental discipline of a regression model and just understanding what you are trying to do with data was really good to how I would think about a story, how I would structure an interview. Interviews are, in kind of a weird way, like a regression model. And it wasn't deliberate that way. I just kind of over time thought, wow, that's kind of helpful. I'm having flashbacks to stats here, or accounting, just the discipline of accounting. Like the very basic of balance is actually fundamental to lots of things. It's fundamental to running a farm, but it's also fundamental to reporting a story or thinking about, creating a digital website for a newspaper. You have to think of assets and liabilities in all sorts of different terms, but it just brings that kind of mental model to another sector. So all to say, the rigors of business school, of case studies, as I mentioned earlier, just of that critical thinking was really helpful for me in journalism and in being able to connect that with maybe some of the more creative side of my brain. And then you mentioned India. Was really fortunate to be there in the 1990s, right after my wife and I, she's a photographer, so we were working together, and we arrived right after the country opened up economically. And it was such a powerful life lesson for me in the power of markets, because India was a socialist economy, planned economy. First thing I tried to do moving there was get a phone, and it was a 5-year waiting list to get a telephone line. This is in like 1991, and you had to go through days of applying like paper forms. It was crazy, unless you managed to know someone in the system and give them something, and then suddenly you had a phone. I thought, wow, this is a really inefficient, almost Soviet-esque model. And then India liberalized and privatized the phone market. And I've never seen anything like it. Like just suddenly, like in 3 years, there were phone booths in every little village I would go to, run by some little entrepreneur who was like a subcontractor to this new private company. And then cell phones came along and on. So just to be in a country, in an economy, to watch it go warp speed through economic liberalization is something I never want to forget, because it showed the power of human ingenuity, the power of the markets, and we'll talk lots about also the risks and problems of markets. They're not perfect, but boy, they sure beat government planning. And I hope not to forget that. Just the individuals, we're all human. We all like to create. We're good at trading with each other. And when governments get out of the way, except for many of the important parts of what governments do, it's awesome. There's a conspiracy of awesome, Christian.
It is awesome.
I've written that down as something I want to read, because you gave me a book, Christian, called the Twin Thieves, which was it was great. It was great. So thank you for that. You've got a good eye.
I think 2 points come out of that, hey, Evan. I mean, the one is what we see lots in our kind of our favorite entrepreneurs, and I'll use intrapreneurs too, because I'm going to go into that next, is, we always say that business is it's like sports, right? Nobody woke me up to play hockey at 6:30 a.m. when I was young. I just did it because I love it. And to be honest, I don't feel any different about business, right? Evan would get mad at me because I don't really pay myself. I just kind of take money when there's money and just get up and go do what I love every day. But really what it is, though, is I think that group of people doesn't see problems as problems, right? There's too many people in the world that you see a problem and it just stops life. That's all they can focus on. They can't get by it. And I do think that commerce degree and the business background, whether that's through mentorship or university, really, like, problem's just a pivot point in the game. It's like being on the penalty kill. You just find a way to get through it and go back to normal life, right? But it's just a challenge. It's not a stop, right? So I think that was kind of a unique way that I saw how you explained how you used it in journalism, right? Just take the good parts and then the critical thinking and balance. Now, if you could maybe get the federal government to understand balance of assets and liabilities, that'd be great too. But I don't know how long your career plan's on lasting. But the second piece, I think.
But Christian, that's a really important point for like us all, just to continue to stress to our kids, to new generations, as well as remind ourselves that everything in life is about balance. And I've actually learned that. I didn't learn it. I see it so clearly in banking. I mean, banking is nothing more than balancing, right? And when you lose balance, and we've seen this in banks that are no longer with us in the United States, they lost that sense of balance. We lose that in the economy. We lose that in our personal lives. But yes, governments have to find balance as well. Nothing is sustainable without that long-term balance.
Well, and the interesting part, Heaves, is, I mean, I've heard you say it a million times, is the whole thought process on having control versus not control, or the direct control. Like, you're a recovering accountant. I mean, you use that joke a million times. I've actually stole it from you, and I use it in every speech I do. But it comes back to, we both have a CPA, we both have the accounting degree, but neither of us practice that on the daily. It's essentially comes in when you have a problem, and instead of going to that, I've got no control, it's the environment, it's government, it's whatever you want to put under that rock, you come back to, no, I've got control. It's a strategy, it's a risk management, it's a mathematical equation, right? So commerce always comes back in. So I find that the interesting part of you followed your passion, much like Christian's done, and I honestly say I've done, is get out of commerce and into something else, but you always differentiate back and bring it back in, because it actually applies to more than just accounting and numbers, right?
I think the other neat point too is, we haven't talked about this much on the podcast, but I mean, so obviously entrepreneurs always kind of support each other, and I think there needs to be more of that. But in today's world, I think intrapreneurs are as important as entrepreneurs. And I mean, I think you're a great example of it. I've talked about a good friend of mine, Wayne Poprosky at MNP, a good example of it. And what I say is that, like, they're just entrepreneurs that got caught up in really good positions that they love doing for big companies. But they're every bit as important as entrepreneurs. And you can see it. You can see the excitement of business and of our country and of success come out of you when you speak. Like when you're telling the India story, you can see that conspiracy of awesomeness just makes you smile, right? And so I think we act, personally, I actively seek out entrepreneurs with inside the companies that I deal with, or the programs that I deal with. And I would say, I think it was your podcast we first met, but then, our friendship kind of went on speed after that between CANZA and COP and everything else. So I'll lead this into, so how did thought leadership at RBC all of a sudden, in my mind, really take agriculture and kind of put it up in one of their top, I'd say top 4 priorities, but I would argue that it's more this natural resource priority that has become a real big thing for RBC. And we've talked about this lots, right? The Canadian Business Council, everything, we think natural resources. And for me, it's exciting for me to see not only RBC, but to see someone like you and your team putting out thought leadership and research and spending time on agriculture.
Love to talk at length about that. So the roots of thought leadership at RBC, I mean, in some ways it goes back more than a century. It's almost as old as the bank. But when Dave Mackay came in as CEO a decade ago, and he's a lifer at RBC, started his career here. He has a vision for the bank and for the and in some ways for the country, for the economy. And he and I had known each other previously, and we're talking about what he was aiming to do as CEO, and helping Canada prosper was really important to him. And there's self-interest in that. Like, if Canada doesn't prosper, RBC is going to be challenged. We need our home market to grow and thrive more than it has been, and it can. This is a solvable problem. So how do we help the country? It's not on us to run the economy or make decisions for governments, but we can inform. And governments and industry groups and lots of clients come to us for insights beyond kind of banking products and services. So with that aspiration of helping to inform and maybe even inspire Canadian prosperity, we created this unit that I get to oversee, which includes our amazing economics team who study the economy, but also policy researchers on different sectors. And very early on, as we were kind of looking at what's Canada's economy going to be like in the late 2020s, so this is going back 10 years, resources, but agriculture and food was top of the list. And it was always striking to me how Canada is a great ag power, and we don't act like one. We export food and fertilizer and energy and lots of other things to the world. And we get paid for it, but we don't think about it strategically. So we thought, okay, we need to lean into this resources opportunity for the country. And agriculture is critical. We think, we did a lot of research on this, we feel Canadian ag exports can grow 25% by the 2030s. The world, you guys know this, your listeners know this, the world needs Canada to produce more, process more, export more. And the better we are at that, the higher quality that we export, the more we'll make doing it. But it's unfortunately, if food is something we all are intimately knowledgeable about, but we kind of take it for granted or don't even know that we are this awesome food exporter. So that was the impetus of that, and we've added a full-time ag policy lead, which I think is pretty cool for a bank. Someone who's we've got a great ag banking teams of teams across the country who know agriculture incredibly well. But this person just focuses on, Lisa Ashton is her name. She's got a PhD from Guelph, farm girl from southwestern Ontario. She and I were at Christian's farm in August, along with a group of other food executives. That's an indication of what we're trying to help the country with, is to explore ag policies, research, connect different groups. It's always amazing how governments try to talk to each other but don't, or even departments within government don't. Yeah. And that's also something that RBC is sometimes able to help with. If we're talking to a finance department about fiscal balance issues, for instance, we can share a lot of stuff on agriculture. And just as the last point on that, if I can share a story from some years ago, we had done a big report on these issues and the potential of ag, and someone in the federal finance department, someone senior, said to me, "We get it now. we thought this was just, Ag Canada always lobbying for for more.
Yeah.
Like, sounded like they just tuned them out. Like, here comes Ag Canada looking for more, or the XYZ association coming for more. They said, well, if RBC is seeing it this way, maybe it's something we should take more seriously.
And that's where I saw the initial push. Like the Farmer 4.0 report was probably the first time that I'd seen not only a bank, but let's just call it outside industry come in and start writing reports on, those key areas of agriculture that we needed to fix. Whether it was, that one was agriculture workers, education, investment, the equity or the markets, the exports. Like, that was the first time that I saw you guys actually put the thought leadership out. And I think obviously lots of farms read it, saw it, and agreed with it. So it was interesting to see the change a bit as industry started taking an interest more into agriculture, as you said, and not just from a perspective of programs and as you said, Ag Canada and that stuff, but from how do we make it better as a group? Because the one line that stuck with me is you said we were trying to get the industry in Canada moving forward, not just our business.
Yeah.
And I see that with a lot of farms nowadays is they're not just focused just on them. There is an actual push of telling our story, whether it's a Jake Legee or Christian or somebody else, of actually trying to get the real story out and to pull the industry forward instead of just themselves, right?
There's also a huge imperative around climate, which is a big part of our work, and something not enough Canadians appreciate is that agriculture, again, back to that point about balance, when we talk about net zero, which is the challenge of balance, agriculture is this enormous asset for us in terms of soil sequestration, being able to absorb carbon, not all the carbon that we emit, but a decent chunk of it. We are already absorbing through enhanced soil practices. You guys are a great model of that. And we're really excited about the opportunity to develop economic models that reward farmers for what they preserve as well as what they produce. But Canadians, by and large, don't appreciate that we have one of the world's greatest soil assets, soil bases. I think it's 5th largest in the world. It's already doing a lot of the heavy lifting for carbon capture and sequestration, as some might call it, and can do a lot more. So it's a huge national asset.
Yeah, I think we're going to dive right into CANZA and carbon, but for the listeners, John mentioned, I would encourage you to follow John, and I would encourage you he mentioned Lisa Ashton, came out of Grain Farmers of Ontario, if I remember correctly. I got a lot of respect for them. Good friend Mark Brock used to chair it for a long time. They do really well in Ottawa, but Lisa, make sure you follow her too. And a quick little story on Dave, right, Mackay. So I'd only met him once. John phones me up and says, so we're going to do the AGM in Saskatoon. If you want to do a fireside chat with Dave. Yeah, sure. What are we talking about? Well, just agriculture and stuff. You'll be fine. So that was our guidance, right? And I, like I said, met Dave once in a big meeting. So this is a pretty small setting, 250 people. And we're doing a fireside chat. And I'm like, well, typical Christian, I'm going to throw something out to see how Dave answers it, right? So basically, kind of admitted I don't do a ton of business with RBC, but got a lot of respect for John. So Dave, you kind of get a lot of respect with it. But, you're a bank focused mainly in Central Canada. I know you have branches everywhere, but headquartered in Central Canada. And we're talking about agriculture. And Dave, he didn't miss a beat. And he looked at me, he puts his hands up in the air, and he goes, I don't understand. A banker from Eastern Canada saying I'm here to help, and you don't trust me right away. And I can't remember which president said it. It might have been Reagan. I can't remember. But I started laughing on stage because it was one of those questions that you never quite know how a CEO is going to take, right? The ones that are more worried about themselves than their company and the country, actually you could see the perturbedness in their face. And Dave just grinned and took it and came right back with a barb that had the whole crowd laughing. And right then I was like, I like this guy, right? And I've had a lot of conversations with him since. And you truly, nobody can understand the responsibility he has running a company that big. But I would 100% agree with you. Every meeting I've had with him, he truly wants Canada to capture the opportunity of being a natural resource superpower, and all the things that fall out of that, right? You can just see that passion inside them to help enable that. So sometimes we don't do enough, giving credit to the right people. And I think, obviously we got you on the podcast, but Dave and Lisa are some people our followers should watch. Now I'll jump into, so obviously our first couple meetings led into you and a group of companies starting the initiative CANZA, the Canadian Alliance for Net-Zero Agriculture. And I'm going to let you explain it and kind of go through it. But I get a lot of questions and kickback because, to be honest, some farmers are like, Christian, why the hell are you working with anybody about climate? It's all a scam, right? What I would say is I wasn't interested until who I felt some of the right companies and then some of the individuals that you brought in those companies were involved. Because then I felt it could actually make change and actually could have some differences within policy. And at that time, two things happened. One, you introduced me to some fairly large conversations globally that really made me realize the billions of dollars that are ready to be deployed in this space, and we just haven't given it an active market or an active way to do it. And then two, the real feeling I got from this group of companies that they did feel agriculture was an asset and could be one of the best things Canada has to showcase around the world for what we do to climate. And I don't like the word regenerative because we in agriculture didn't get to make it, but we've had that problem our whole life. But I mean, zero till is like the number one thing, and there's nobody better at it in the world than us. And yet everybody talking about it doesn't even know what a zero till air drill looks like. They don't know that it was born in Langbank, Saskatchewan, 30 miles from my house, right? So you go on your CANZA rant now. That's my lead in.
So the origin story of CANZA was Dave, and I think it's always worth remembering most CEOs are problem solvers. They're just curious. They like to figure stuff out. I love your reference to the PK, Christian. Like, it's just a pivot, and CEOs love that. And so Dave was with Michael McCain from Maple Leaf Foods, and they were part of a bigger discussion about these big issues that I was speaking to, Canada's opportunity to produce more and export more of everything. And they were walking out of it and just shaking their heads saying, like, this grand jamboree ain't going to solve this. Like, government's not going to solve this. We got to take this on. We got to roll up our sleeves here. So they brought in other people in the food system, sat down with farmers and producers and developed this idea of a Canadian Alliance for Net-Zero Agri-Food that would be industry-led approaches to solving some of these challenges. So they brought in Galen Weston from Loblaws, the country's biggest food retailer. If you're going to have a value chain, it's got to go from the consumer to the store, going backwards. The processors, we brought in McCain Food, the potato company. Maple Leaf is more the pork side. Nutrien, and built this really dynamic group along with lots of innovative farmers like you, Christian, across the country. And what we're trying to do, and we're really focused on action. There's important policies, but there's lots of groups working on that. We just want to literally get our hands dirty with this, and we decided to focus. We did a big project researching what are the levers for Canadian agri-food to produce more while emitting less. That's what I like to call Canada's moonshot. We can produce 25% more food with fewer emissions. That's our moonshot. Let's make that a national passion project. Well, you do it through action, and one of the actions is, as we were discussing earlier, soil sequestration, but finding ways to reward farmers for what they're doing. And it's not charity. We got to create a model, start with insets in the value chain where Maple Leaf or McCain or another producer will reward the farmer, and then the retailer, Loblaws and others will reward the producer, and then the consumer will recognize that. So ultimately, I should be able to get a loaf of net zero bread or whatever it's going to be called at a store, and I'll be inclined to buy that, and then the farmer who began the journey of that loaf of bread gets rewarded for my purchase decision. We think that's a really powerful economic model. The companies through the supply chain are also trying to address what are called Scope 3 emissions. So not the emissions directly from what they do, but related to how they go about that. So rewarding the farmers becomes that offset, except it's within the supply chain, so it's known as an inset. This is working in Europe. We think it can work here. And Christian, you said something once, which I think I really annoy people, but I'm going to continue to annoy them because it's so powerful. You said, when I get the check, I'll know this is serious. And so at our CANZA meetings or in other engagements, I hope you don't mind, I use that line and I say, everything like this meeting, this engagement, this project has to get Christian the check. It's not about you, Christian. It's a metaphor for like, we got to get reward the farmers. So that's what we're working on, creating a model. And it's complex. There's got to be measurement, reporting, and verification systems that are credible. There's got to be good data. But those are solvable problems. That's all part of the moonshot. It's like NASA and Houston in the 60s. Like, yeah, there's all sorts of problems, but that didn't stop NASA from getting a person to the moon and back by the end of the 1960s, which everyone said was absolutely possible. This is not as complex as getting a human to the moon and back. And we can do this, and we have to do it as a country by 2030. And I keep hearing people saying, well, we're going to have to spend a few more years at this and that. And I'm like, no, like this has to be, those checks have to be flowing to farmers by 2030. Like that's, and that's one of our challenges as a country, is we are not really great at that project management, to that discipline. It's funny, like I love your references to sport, Christian, because we're actually really good at it in like hockey. We bring together random people, many like in August, and create a Team Canada in 3 weeks, or maybe it's not for the Winter Olympics, it'll be January. And like it's not even 3 weeks, right? In 2 weeks, they figured out how to play together and they're the best in the world. So we actually know how to do focused efforts, but we aren't so good at it in the economy. So I'm hoping CANZA, a lot of us are hoping CANZA becomes not just a great thing for agri-food, but it's kind of a bit of a model for the country of like, how do we just create these moonshots and just get shite done in a responsible way, but a disciplined way. We're doing the same with biodigesters. I've been talking exclusively about soil, but there's a huge opportunity in biodigesters, which I've spent a bit of time on in both Manitoba and Alberta. And one of the challenges for our country, another challenge for our country, is scale. We don't have the scale that a lot of others have. You guys are big scalers, but as you often note, Christian, most farmers in Canada are very small. That's a challenge. It's a solvable problem through lots of collaborative efforts, which is what we're trying to do with biodigesters. But it's an interesting challenge. And then one of the things that really lit us up, I think in a good way, with CANZA, and I hope it does this for Canada, was the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., which was a wake-up call to Canada. The bear had woken up, or the elephant, whatever you want to call the U.S., had woken up and was just not only putting huge amounts of money through the federal government into all sorts of parts of the economy: hydrogen, carbon capture, regenerative, renewable natural gas, RNG, but also these other climate smart ag practices. And I had maybe a bit of a wake up moment for a couple of times. One was, it was at COP, at the UN Climate Conference, Christian, where I got to spend time with the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and it was just such an eye opener how for the U.S. it's just business. It's like, I'm here for climate, but I'm really just here to help American farmers grow more and do it. They call it climate smart agriculture. I just thought, wow, that's like, there go the Americans. They know how to.
Yeah.
Back to our business question, like they were just like, we can actually grow more, export more, do more for climate, and make more money. And none of that is mutually exclusive. In fact, you do all those together. And it was really powerful to see an ag secretary out there just as like a business guy and saying, like, show me the money. So that was one moment. And then I was in Manitoba with some hog farmers just after IRA came out, and they were talking about what was going on south of the border. And just the speed, that dynamism of the American economy is something we need to really remind ourselves of as Canadians. Because like when the U.S. gets focused on something, like we're seeing this in all sorts of fields, they move with a speed and a scale that we tend not to focus on in this country. So we got to find ways of hyperscaling in a different way, because we're not going to be 300 million people with that size of an economy. But there's other ways of scaling. But speed is entirely up to us. We set our own speed limit. So if we're talking about developing like national biodigester networks or national inset markets for soil sequestration, moving to offset markets eventually, how do we ensure that we're moving at a speed, the speed of the market, not setting a speed limit that's going to hold us back?
Now, I know, John, you're on a bit of a time limit today, so I don't want to keep you too long. So, Heebs, you want to give a final question? And I've got one, my own. Mine will be short, but
Yeah.
give him kind of your conclusion question for today. And I'm hoping he'll come back on sometime, because obviously we got lots more we could go down. Let's put it that way.
But, a couple key points I thought you brought up, John, is one, we're smaller than the U.S., so we should actually be able to be faster. And yet we seem to regulate more, right? Like, good enough never seems to be good enough in Canada. We want to regulate it so that it has to be perfect, and then by then it's dead, right? And you and I have talked about this, right? And I think you talk about the check. I mean, is there anybody that says, show me the money more than the Americans? Show me the money and we'll figure it out, right? Don't give me a white paper. That's a good spot for my coffee cup to sit. Show me the money, right? And I think that's where, this check to farmers is so important. And it's at a big level too. I mean, I think you bring net farm income up across the country, it's like a rural revitalization fund. I mean, all our governments are trying to way to stimulate the rural economy. Last time I checked, farmers spend like 99% of all their money locally. They can't. Like, the donkey died where the farm is. They can't really leave that spot. It's not that simple, right? So I agree with you. I think speed is of critical nature, and we need to get there with a collaboration between government and industry. So if I had to ask John one last question, we've talked about CANZA, we've talked a bit about policy, we've talked a bit about, the opportunity of agriculture. So John, it's 9 months from now, and you've been asked to give a one-pager with the top 5 things you do to allow Canada to grab its throne as a natural resource superpower globally. And the government says, we'll just implement them the minute you hand us the paper. You don't even have to give me 5. I know that you'll have 2 or 3 kicking around in the back of your mind. What would you do the next morning?
Brilliant question, and I'm not going to do justice to it, but just a few thoughts off the top of my head. Number one, create a national test market for soil sequestration economic models. Or that's not a very good way of phrasing it, but like, let's just get going, giddy up, try this. There's no harm done. Let's, no lives are going to be lost. No one's going to be harmed. Let's just try this economic model and create, a decent sized. It doesn't need to be wide open, but just a decent sized model for it. Number 2, declare agri-food to be an essential part of a national economic strategy. And I think governments say this here and there, but it's like just boldly. There are 3 things we can win at in the world economically. One of them has to be agri-food. And lots of other things are important, but the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the premiers, whenever they talk, should keep saying, how's ag going? Report back. Show us the numbers, how we're progressing. Number 3, infrastructure, which we haven't gotten into this in this conversation, but we got a problem. We can grow more, we can produce more. The world wants to buy more. Can we actually get it to the world? Not as reliably as we should. I had another wake-up moment a few years ago when I got to meet with a Japanese delegation that was in Canada. And it was so interesting to see the Japanese. They're just incredibly disciplined, focused. And they, the chair of Mitsui was leading the delegation, and they laid out essentially what they want from Canada over the next 25 years. We're going to need this much canola. We're going to need this much LNG. On and on. Like, it was a shopping list. And they said, we really like Canada. We really trust Canada, and we'd like to buy more from Canada. We're not sure we can count on you to get us more. And I thought, oh my God, this is like the world's best customer that you could have, the Japanese. So demanding of high quality, willing to pay for that, trustworthy. And it's saying, like, you've got 2 rail lines to 2 ports. That's one of our concerns as we think about where we're going to get our food for the next 25 years. That's got to be almost an alarm bell for the country. So how are we going to solve that? Because we know how to build rail lines. We know how to build ports. We're really good. We know how to finance them with our pension funds. And we got the world's best kind of just this overabundance almost of coastlines and exit points for what we produce. So that's got to be another sort of clarion call for the country. We've got to, infrastructure has just become a code word for everything. We've got to just be focused on, no, we need more rail, more port. That's sort of the key elements of infrastructure. We don't have what we need to fulfill our ambitions going out to 2050.
Okay, well, mine's gonna be a lot easier than that, John. So, I mean, you spent a few hours out at the farm, obviously a few weeks back. Give me 1 or 2 key takeaways you took from there that maybe you didn't know or you found interesting, and obviously you had some people with you, and anything they might have mentioned that they maybe hadn't seen before.
It was wonderful. I hope to come back again and again if you'll have me. So I knew this, but great to see it in person. And something that Canadians again don't appreciate is how most farms of significant size in this country are serious businesses, and we need to appreciate that. Farming is a serious business. It's a serious part of commerce. It's also a serious part of innovation. You guys are both sitting there with ball caps on and hoodies, and that's great. But you're like CEOs. You run big enterprises. You could be in a suit and a tie. You don't want to be, and I don't begrudge you that. But we need to see our farmers as business leaders. and take them as seriously as we take the CEOs of lots of different businesses across the country. We need to see farming as an investable opportunity. And that's also an opportunity for the country. We've got big pools of capital in the country. How do we devise better and better ways to ensure that that capital goes to folks like you and innovative farmers across the country who can deploy that capital and deploy it with a speed and a scale that delivers market returns for that. And it's not just on the investor and the farmer. We have to ensure that the regulatory environment, the market environment, the trade environment all helps facilitate that. And then, I mean, I don't want to go on and on here. Maybe I already have, but it really struck me, first of all, like how beautiful it is always to see like a working farm and a family farm, even though it's like a corporate operation. It's a really important part of our fabric as a country. And Christian, like you've talked a lot about the need for rural communities. That really struck with me, and to invest in rural communities. If you lose the hockey rink, you're probably going to lose part of the farm family, and then things go south from there. So we've got to continue to think about how do we help places like Moosomin thrive and grow, because it's essential to all the other things that we're talking about. No Moosomin, no farms, no exports, etc. But beyond that, kind of that community spirit, which is always a joy to be part of, how challenging it is to run a farm. And you're saying, yeah, duh. But we talk about how we need to get more people into communities like Moosomin, or to take over farms, or come back to the farm, or invest in the farm. It's hard. Like it's not just physically hard, but just the business model versus like starting a software company in some city or town somewhere. And I don't mean that as just some sort of cheap observation. I think when we think about farming and the economic model, we don't appreciate enough, we probably discount too much the kind of the inherent or implicit time as well as energy that farmers put into the work. So back to that question of balance, like just how to model it in a way that ensures there's balance, lifestyle-wise, economic-wise, community-wise, for the farms and the community of farms that are still an essential part of the Canadian fabric.
I can kind of see why you two get along real well. I mean, that was probably the best answer I've had to that question in my life. So thank you for coming on, John. I know you're busy, so it was nice to have you on and have these conversations, and obviously to see your viewpoint from off the farm and how actually tied back into agriculture you are, because we have a whole bunch of professionals that we've interviewed and had discussions with, and sometimes they're not, they live in Toronto, they may not see the actual farm, but you're very well spoken on the agriculture side. So I definitely see that and appreciate that quite a bit.
No, thank you both. Thank you both. This is such an honor for me to be part of this conversation. I've learned a ton. I've jotted down notes here. But thank you all also for what you're doing to kind of elevate our understanding of farming and of agriculture, but also kind of set a cool ambition. It's audacious what you've done and what you're aiming to do, and maybe it's part of that conspiracy of awesomeness, but it's awesome.
So remember, like, share, subscribe. Any comments below, guys? We use them on the next podcast, and I'm hoping, like I said, John will come back and see us in a bit sometime to answer a few more questions. And remember, look at Maverick, Farmer Coach, all those nice things we like to sell to you while we're on here. And that's the Truth About Ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.